Let me ask you something. Have you ever stood face to face with someone who made you question everything about yourself? Someone who could twist your words, rewrite reality, and leave you feeling like you were the problem? Yeah, I've been there. And there was a moment, a final moment, where something inside me snapped. Not in defeat, in clarity. That was the moment everything shifted. That was the moment that broke the narcissist. Because here's the truth. Narcissists don't crumble when you beg or explain or try to fix things. They break when you stop playing their game, when you reclaim your voice, your worth, your power. So today, I'm not here to tell you a sad story. I'm here to walk you through the moment I finally stood up and the exact shift that shattered the vision they were trying so hard to maintain. Because you can have that moment too. It starts small, almost invisible. A comment that makes you second guess yourself. A subtle joke at your expense that they call just teasing. A moment where your gut whispers, something's off, but you brush it aside because everything else seems perfect, at least on the surface. That's the first crack in the mirror the narcissist wants you to look into. And from that point on, it becomes a carefully calculated game of control. Narcissists don't show up in your life wearing a villain mask. They arrive as charmers, rescuers, people who just get you. They mirror your hopes, your dreams, your insecurities. They study you, and they weaponize every piece of information you give them. At first, it feels like you've found your soulmate, your best friend, or someone who really sees you. But what's actually happening is you're being hooked emotionally, mentally, even chemically, into a cycle of validation and confusion. They build you up with praise, then tear you down in subtle surgical strikes. It's a strategy: idealize, devalue, discard. But while it's happening, you don't see it. Because in between the cruelty, they give just enough affection to keep you craving more. That inconsistency, that's the trap. It keeps you in a state of anxiety, constantly trying to win back the person you thought they were in the beginning. And they know it. Gaslighting is one of their favorite tools. You question something they did or said, and they turn it back on you. Suddenly, you're too sensitive. You misunderstood. You're making things up. Over time, you start to distrust your own memory, your own feelings, your own reality. That's not a coincidence. That's the manipulation working exactly as intended. Because the more uncertain you feel about yourself, the more power they have to define the truth. They isolate you too, sometimes physically, sometimes emotionally. They plant seeds of doubt about your friends, your family, your coworkers. So they tell you as people are jealous, toxic, don't have your best interests at heart, and little by little, your circle shrinks until they're the only voice you're consistently hearing. That isolation makes it even harder to spot the manipulation because you've lost your reality check, people. That's how narcissists operate. They divide and conquer. You start living in a constant state of hypervigilance, reading their moods like a weather forecast, wondering if today's going to be a good day or a bad one, walking on eggshells to avoid setting them off. And when they do explode or withdraw affection, you blame yourself because they've trained you to. You become the one who always apologizes, always over-explains, always tries harder, and they reward that with just enough warmth to keep you locked in the cycle. The worst part is, you might still believe they love you, or that you can fix it. You make excuses for them. They've had a rough past. They're under stress. They don't mean it. But love doesn't look like that. Real love doesn't manipulate, belittle, or control. It doesn't drain you of your confidence and call it passion. Recognizing these tactics is the first step to breaking the cycle. Because once you see the game, you can stop playing it. And that moment, when the fog begins to lift, is the moment the narcissist starts to lose their grip. Most people think abuse is only about physical harm or screaming matches. But some of the deepest scars are formed in silence, underneath constant cycles of fear, hope, confusion, and longing. That's where trauma bonding takes root. It's not just emotional attachment, it's emotional captivity. And when you're in it, you don't even realize you're trapped. You just know you can't seem to walk away, no matter how much it hurts. Trauma bonding happens when the brain begins to associate pain with love. When moments of kindness and connection are unpredictably followed by cruelty, withdrawal, or punishment, your nervous system enters survival mode. You begin to live for the highs and tolerate the lows. The person hurting you becomes the only one who can temporarily relieve that pain, and that creates a powerful, almost chemical dependency that's hard to break. This is what narcissists are masters at. They don't just manipulate your thoughts, they hijack your biology. During the idealization phase, they flood you with praise, affection, and attention. Your brain responds by releasing dopamine, oxytocin, and serotonin, the feel-good chemicals that create emotional bonding. You feel euphoric, seen, wanted. But once they've secured your attachment, the switch flips. The same person who lifted you up begins to tear you down. And your brain, craving the emotional high again, becomes desperate to win back their affection. That desperation is the trap. Every time the narcissist pulls away or punishes you and then comes back with even the smallest gesture of kindness, your brain rewards you. You get another hit of dopamine. That intermittent reinforcement, unpredictable reward spaced out by fear and tension, is the same technique used in gambling addiction. You never know when the next win is coming. So you keep playing, keep hoping, keep trying. It creates a distorted reality where pain becomes normal and any moment of calm or affection feels like proof of love. You start to think, if I can just be better, if I can just fix this, they'll love me like they used to. And that thought keeps you stuck because they've conditioned you to take responsibility for their behavior, to see their mistreatment as your failure. And once that narrative is internalized, they don't even have to do much. You'll gaslight yourself on their behalf. The dependency gets even deeper when your self-worth becomes tied to their validation. They've isolated you, made you question your judgment, and broken down your confidence. Now, they're the only voice you trust to tell you who you are, even when that voice is cruel. It's not just that you want their approval. It feels like you need it to survive. And that illusion is the core of trauma bonding. It's not weakness, it's wiring. People on the outside don't understand. They'll ask, why don't you just leave? But it's not that simple. To leave, you have to believe you deserve better. You have to confront the guilt, the fear, the grief of losing the fantasy you were clinging to. You have to rewire your entire sense of safety and identity. And that takes courage, not just to walk away, but to stay away. Understanding trauma bonding isn't about blame. It's about clarity. It's about realizing the invisible chains that kept you locked in something toxic weren't about love. They were about survival. And once you name the bond for what it is, you begin to take your power back. There comes a point in every relationship with a narcissist where words no longer work. You've pleaded, explained, justified, defended yourself so many times that it becomes exhausting. Every conversation feels like a trap. They twist your words, deny your experience, or pretend to listen only to use it against you later. And after a while, you realize that no matter how much you speak from your heart, they're not hearing you, they're managing you. That's when silence becomes your greatest weapon. Silence, to a narcissist, is not just the absence of words, it's the removal of fuel. Narcissists thrive on reactions. Anger, tears, confusion, desperation, it all feeds their ego. It reassures them that they still have power over your emotional state. The more emotionally reactive you are, the more control they feel. So when you go silent, when you stop explaining, when you no longer give them access to your inner world, they feel it like a threat. Not because you're being cruel, but because you're breaking the bond. But silence is more than just not talking. It's about energetic detachment. It's the internal shift where you stop needing them to understand. You stop looking for validation. You stop hoping they'll change. That detachment doesn't happen overnight. It starts with emotional boundaries, refusing to let their behavior dictate your mood, your choices, or your sense of self-worth. It's a quiet reclaiming of power that no longer requires permission. When you reach that level of detachment, your silence is no longer passive. It becomes intentional. It says, I'm no longer playing this game. You stop engaging in circular conversations. You stop trying to prove your innocence. You stop trying to rescue them from their own dysfunction. And in doing so, you start rescuing yourself. It's not cold, it's not revenge, it's clarity. One of the hardest parts of detachment is resisting the urge to correct the narrative. Narcissists will lie about you, smear your name, play the victim to others. And the instinct to defend yourself, to set the record straight, is strong. But here's the truth. People who know you don't need an explanation. And people who believe the narcissist don't want one. Choosing silence in those moments isn't weakness. It's wisdom. You're no longer wasting your energy proving something to people who are committed to misunderstanding you. The narcissist will notice the change immediately. They'll test you. They might love bomb, provoke you, guilt trip you, or even escalate their tactics to regain control. This is where emotional detachment becomes your shield. You don't rise to it. You don't engage. You observe without reacting. You maintain your center. That calm presence, that refusal to be baited, is disarming. It exposes their game without a single word being spoken. This phase can be deeply uncomfortable, especially if your identity has been shaped around managing their emotions. You may feel guilt. You may feel like you're being mean or cold, but the truth is you're protecting your peace. You're rebuilding the boundary between what belongs to you and what doesn't. You're allowing yourself to exist without the constant. You need to explain your existence to someone who's never really seen you. Silence, paired with emotional detachment, isn't about shutting down. It's about opening up space. Space for clarity, for healing, for truth to rise to the surface without interference. It's about no longer giving someone access to you just because they demand it. It's about teaching yourself that you are allowed to disengage from dysfunction, even if it's uncomfortable at first. When you've spent months or even years under the influence of a narcissist, your identity begins to erode in ways you don't even realize. It doesn't happen all at once. It happens in the small daily compromises, the way you downplay your feelings to keep the peace, how you dress differently to avoid their comments, how you silence your opinion because they're too much, too emotional, or wrong. You chip away at yourself a little at a time until one day you barely recognize the person in the mirror. That's not just emotional exhaustion, it's identity loss. You've been so focused on managing their moods, protecting their ego, and maintaining a fragile peace that your own needs, values, and desires got pushed aside, sometimes completely buried. And when you finally break free or start to pull away, the question hits you like a wall: who am I without them? That's the moment where true healing begins, not just by leaving, but by reclaiming what was taken. Reclaiming your identity isn't about going back to who you were before. It's about discovering who you are now, after everything. It starts with noticing what you think, what you want, what makes you feel alive, safe, and whole. For so long, your instincts were overridden by their voice, their judgment, their standards. Now, it's time to reconnect with your own. This process is uncomfortable, even scary, because stepping into your true identity means letting go of the version of yourself that was molded to survive. That version may have been quiet, agreeable, overly self-sacrificing, always trying to please. And while that part of you kept you safe, it's not who you are. Reclaiming yourself means honoring that survival mode, but also deciding to move beyond it. Boundaries become the scaffolding for this new version of you, not the kind of boundaries you explain over and over, hoping someone will respect. These are unbreakable boundaries, quiet, non-negotiable, and rooted in deep self-respect. They don't need to be loud or aggressive. They just need to be clear and enforced. A boundary is not about controlling others. It's about controlling what you allow. You start by listening to your body. If you feel tense, drained, or anxious around someone, that's data. It's your system warning you. You don't need to justify your discomfort. You don't owe anyone access to you just because they want it. If someone's presence consistently causes you harm, you have every right to create space. That space isn't punishment, it's protection. At first, setting boundaries feels unnatural, especially if you've been conditioned to think saying no is selfish. But each time you honor your limits, you teach yourself something profound. I matter. My time, my energy, my emotions, they matter. And with each boundary you set, you send a message to yourself and the world that you are no longer available for manipulation, for disrespect, for being treated as less than. Reclaiming your identity also means embracing the parts of yourself that were once criticized or mocked. Your sensitivity, your strength, your intuition, your joy. The things they tried to suppress were often the things that threatened them most. Those are the very qualities you now get to reclaim and celebrate. Not just privately, but proudly. This journey isn't linear. You'll have moments of doubt where the old voices echo back. You're being too harsh. Maybe it was your fault. You're overreacting. But those thoughts are remnants of the conditioning. And every time you choose to respond from your truth instead of your trauma, you take another step forward. There comes a breaking point, a moment where the weight of pretending, explaining, shrinking, and tolerating becomes unbearable. You stop trying to make sense of the chaos. You stop trying to fix what's broken. And for the first time, your focus shifts from them to you. That moment isn't loud. It's not always dramatic. Sometimes it's as quiet as a deep breath, a silent realization that you've had enough. That's when the final confrontation begins, not always with them, but within yourself. For so long, your energy was consumed by trying to get them to see your pain. You thought if you just said it right, did it right, proved yourself enough, they'd finally understand. But narcissists don't seek understanding. They seek control. And when you begin to see that clearly, something inside of you snaps into place. Not in anger, but in truth. You recognize that no amount of effort will make someone love you in a healthy way if they are committed to superiority, dominance, or emotional manipulation. This realization is often followed by a wave of fear, because choosing self-respect means letting go of the illusion, the fantasy that one more conversation, one more sacrifice might change them. It means grieving the version of the relationship you were clinging to. And yet, buried under that grief is something more powerful: freedom. The confrontation doesn't always mean a big argument. In fact, the most powerful moment might be the one where you don't argue at all. You simply stop engaging. You stop justifying your needs. You stop reacting to their provocations. You start showing up in your truth, unapologetically. And that's what breaks the dynamic. Because narcissists don't know how to respond when they lose control of your emotions. When your worth is no longer up for negotiation, the power they once held begins to crumble. They might rage, beg, manipulate, or even try to charm their way back. But you've changed. You're not responding from a place of fear or guilt anymore. You're standing in clarity. You understand now that love isn't proven by how much pain you're willing to endure. It's defined by how much peace you're willing to protect. This final confrontation isn't about revenge or making them feel what you felt. It's about reclaiming your dignity without needing their permission. It's about walking away from dysfunction, not because you hate them, but because you finally love yourself enough to stop shrinking for their comfort. There's nothing easy about it. Your voice may shake, your heart may ache, but deep down there's a quiet knowing. This is the moment everything changes. The moment you stop handing over your power. The moment you realize that your self-respect is no longer up for negotiation. Healing doesn't happen in a straight line. It's messy, unpredictable, and often lonelier than anyone talks about. After leaving a narcissist or finally breaking free from their psychological grip, you expect to feel immediate relief. But what often comes first is grief. Grief for the time lost. Grief for the version of yourself that tolerated what you now realize was unacceptable. Grief for the fantasy you held on to for so long. That pain is real, but it's also the doorway to power. In the beginning, it feels like you're standing in the wreckage, trying to rebuild something you barely remember. You. The person you were before the gaslighting, before the confusion, before your worth was slowly chipped away. You start to notice the little things. How you walk into a room, how you speak about yourself, how often you apologize when you don't need to. These aren't just habits, they're survival patterns. But now you're not surviving, you're healing. Turning pain into personal power starts with owning your story without shame. What happened to you wasn't your fault. You weren't stupid, weak, or naive. You were human. You wanted to be loved, to be understood, to feel safe. And there is no shame in that. The manipulation you endured says far more about their character than yours. And the fact that you are still standing, that speaks volumes about your strength. You begin to shift when you stop asking, why did they do this to me? And start asking, what do I need to learn from this? That shift doesn't excuse the abuse, but it does reclaim your agency. You are no longer a passive character in someone else's narrative. You become the author of your own healing. And that means setting the pace, choosing who gets access to your life, and creating meaning out of the chaos. The tools that help you heal aren't always grand gestures. Sometimes they're as simple as saying no without explaining. Going for a walk when your body feels anxious. Writing down your truth when your mind starts to spiral. Choosing to believe the kind voice inside you instead of the old critical one that sounds like them. These small, quiet acts of self-trust begin to build something powerful, resilience. Healing forward also means expanding your world again. Narcissistic relationships are incredibly isolating. They shrink your reality down to them, their needs, their moods, their validation. But now you get to ask, what lights me up? What relationships feel reciprocal and safe? Where do I feel most alive? You don't have to rush into answers. The asking alone is a sign you're coming back to life. One of the most transformative moments is when you realize you're no longer triggered by the past in the same way. You might hear their name and feel nothing, or remember something they said and think, that wasn't about me at all. That's not forgetting, it's healing. It means you've created enough emotional distance and self-awareness to detach your identity from your trauma. Eventually, the pain becomes part of your story, but it stops defining you. You carry it not as a weight, but as wisdom. You use it to protect your boundaries, to see red flags more clearly, to guide others who are still lost in their own fog. Your voice, once silenced or doubted, now becomes a source of strength, not just for you, but for others who need proof that healing is possible. You don't just move on, you move forward with clarity, with confidence, and with the kind of strength that only comes from walking through the fire and choosing not to burn.